Denise Roche.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I join with previous speakers in congratulating you on your appointment as an Assistant Deputy Speaker. It's the first time I've been in the House and spoken with you in the Speaker's chair, although last week I was pleased to see you in that novel role of being in the Committee of the Whole House, the Chair. It's a novelty for me, sir.
Order.
Mr Speaker, the government's priorities, they've stated this term, are going to be around child poverty, and while in their address it was useful for them to determine child poverty as one of their priorities, it lacked any detail, and I haven't heard really as yet any solutions, because so far, except from really a determination to reduce the number of those families who are receiving welfare support, that's the only kind of comment I've really heard from the government about how they want to address child poverty. And today, sir, we had the latest report from UNICEF called Children of the Recession, the impact of the economic crisis on child well-being in rich countries. And it shows that in the period during the global financial crisis, the welfare of New Zealand children went backwards in 3 out of the 4 indicators that we used. And here in New Zealand, our kids weren't as well protected from the impacts of the recession as children in other countries like Australia, for example. And why is this? Well, one reason is because that when the global financial recession started to bite, the Australian government introduced poverty-busting relief like cash payments to low-income families. And what happened here was that the government gave tax cuts to the well-off. And in case anyone hasn't noticed yet, the tax cuts didn't alleviate poverty. They didn't alleviate the problems of our poorest families, because the trickle-down theory is actually a myth, and it has certainly not worked here. The UNICEF report highlights the fact that the National Party's tax cuts did nothing to improve the lives of our poorest children, while the smarter Australian move helped to stimulate the economy, as well as significantly reducing the impacts of child poverty. Mr Speaker, we know what needs to happen to improve our woeful child poverty statistics. And the simple answer is we need to increase the incomes of our families, which, as we've seen in Australia, helps to stimulate the economy. And I agree with the government that the most constructive way to do that is to get more people into jobs and off-state support. But I have to say, sir, that while we absolutely oppose the move by this government to vilify those who access the safety net of our social welfare system, we must remember that one of the biggest beneficiaries of state supports are employers. I'm referring here to working for families. We maintain that as it applies currently, it's unfair because those who need it the most are families with children who are accessing state support already. It's currently used to differentiate between the working and the non-working poor, the worthy and the unworthy poor, and it invites judgment on those families where they're not in work as a result. However, at the moment, working for families is actually an employer subsidy. There are around 380,000 families accessing working for families at the moment. They get their pay from their jobs, but then they're reliant on the tax credit to top up their wages so that they can survive, and many can't. And we've got around 265,000 children living in poverty in New Zealand, and that's about a fifth of all the kids in New Zealand who don't have enough of what they need. And about 2 out of 5 of those children come from families where there is at least one parent in the paid workforce, sir. So what does that say about our pay rates in our country, where a worker can work all hours of the day and the week and still not be able to provide enough for their family to live on? A couple of weeks ago, sir, I met Tassi, a lovely man, a family man in his 30s, and he works as a maintenance contractor for the council. When I was talking to him, I realised that he was on a break, and it was something like 8 o'clock at night on a Thursday. He works 60 hours a week, sir. He only ever has Sunday off, and he uses that day to spend time with his family and to go to church. We've just celebrated Labour Day, sir. That's the day where we commemorate the 8-hour working day. But sadly, that's not a reality for many, many New Zealanders. And I think Samuel Duncan Parnell, who was credited as being the father of the 8-hour working day, would be turning in his grave. But he's the one who's quoted as saying, there are 24 hours a day given us. 8 of these should be for work, 8 for sleep, and the remaining 8 for recreation, and which for men to do what little things they want for themselves. 1 day a week is what Tassi has as a man to do the little things that he wants for himself and his family, sir, and it's not good enough. Because what happens to a family that has one or both of its parents working such long hours that they can't make ends meet? What kind of stress are they under? What happens to their kids? What happens to the kids that are actually working alongside their parents on evening shifts, cleaning the schools to help with their family's income? We must lift wages and create well-paid jobs if we want to address child poverty. And I'm alarmed that this government pays lip service to this issue, and then yet their first legislation in the House will simply force wages down and make matters worse. Then I'm referring, of course, to the Employment Relations Amendment Bill that will be read for its final time, I believe, tomorrow. That bill will force wages down. And that is actually the advice that the government received in their cabinet briefing paper before the bill was actually introduced, that it would force wages down. The bill signals a return to individual-based bargaining and the ability for employers to just simply walk away from collective employment agreement negotiations. It enables employers to opt out of multi-employer bargaining, so there goes any kind of industry standards that we've fought so hard to achieve in the last few years. It removes the right for new workers to have the same terms and conditions as other staff when there is a collective employment agreement in place. And in doing so, it means that new workers can be used to undercut the wages of the longer-term employees. Worryingly, the Employment Relations Amendment Bill also removes the small protections for a whole section of vulnerable employees who are employed by contractors when their contracts change hands. This bill even removes the right for workers to have a meal break or a rest break during their shift. And in so doing, it cuts right across the health and safety legislation that this government is keen to enact. This bill tips the balance of power in the employer-employee relationship sharply towards the employer and works hand in hand with some of the government's previous legislation, most notably the 90-day trials, fire at will legislation, to create a situation of less and less job security for working families and an environment that deliberately enables employers to push the pay down. And we must oppose this kind of industrial relations environment which allows bullies to flourish. Sir, we cannot continue to rely on poverty wages as the method for increasing the profits of New Zealand's economy, because in the long run, we're all poorer for it. We believe in investment, and I was pleased to hear the Minister say the investment method is what works. So investing in our workforce, investing in our employees, investing in a situation that ensures that workers can negotiate collectively is what will increase wages. And that will be the mechanism by which we can invite our young people back to New Zealand, because they're not going to leave Australia when the only jobs they can get here are at $14.65 an hour. Mr. Speaker, We want to see child poverty seriously tackled by this government. We'd like to see a cross-party approach to that. And the first step is to introduce targets. We look forward to a time when this government and this parliament can do that. Thank you.